Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 55 of the Lord Ninja Joke MMA Picks podcast. As always, I'm joined by Josh in Australia and Will in the UK. I'm Dom, I'm based in the US, and today we're going to be talking about the upcoming Moicano versus Duncan card in the Apex in Vegas this weekend. So yeah, without any further ado, let's take a look at the card itself. This is the card. Top to bottom, I think it's pretty poor. We're going to be focusing on these fights. There are some debutants though, and I think Josh, you have some interest in some of these debutants, right?
I mean, interest is a weird word here. I have maybe some grievances as well. Firstly, Tommy McMillan. I was watching tape of him last night, and I was disappointed because for someone who is minus 1,000 according to Tapology, he fights like shit. I know that sounds strong off the bat, but frankly, when I saw him like fight on the Contender Series, I saw a guy who had no striking in his arsenal, no proper striking, but he had decent-ish like front chokes or whatever. So if anyone wants to bet on this fight, I recommend just taking McMillan sub bet, because you don't want to do a money line bet on this guy. This guy is there's no value on the money line bet, and I mean, like, I shouldn't be talking about value here. I am a piss poor bettor. So on the other hand, if you look at Jose Delano versus Robert Ruchala, Delano comes from LFA, I believe, and when I watched his tape, he looked sharp. He was one of those fighters that kind of stood out to me when I watched tape. And the one thing you should keep an eye out from Delano here is those tips to the body and any kind of body kick or body strike, really. Ruchala is a very a haphazard fighter. He throws like a wild man. He dips his body whenever he strikes. He basically billboards his actions before he does those actions, right? He basically telegraphs everything. And so a sharp striker like Delano should be able to easily pick apart him. There has been some talk about Peterson Pat, which is just above that Delano Ruchala fight. That fight intrigues me a little bit because I do think that Peterson via points could be a decent alt bet. I haven't written it down officially, but I do think that if Peterson wants to bore the shit out of everyone, he could, and he could just, drape his big sloppy body all over Pat and just hold him down for however many minutes are left in the round. The rest of the fight card, the rest of the card is mediocre. We've got some women fights there. Apart from the co-main event, those two other women fights are honestly bad. I mean, I'm sure Will is gonna stab me later on for saying that, but like I don't like Haley Cowan. I think that she's more of an athlete who belongs in the Olympics rather than a UFC fighter. Alice Bejeda, she tricked us all last time she fought, because we all thought that she was an Alex Bejeda sibling or the sister, right? And so that wasn't the case. Melissa Gatto versus Barbosa, that one's interesting. I don't have real stakes there, but and I guess the last one I want to talk about briefly here is Trishan Gore. Gore reminds me of a guy who, he was invited to the party. He stayed for a while. He had those drinks. He had, those other things that happens at parties. And then he just stays there. After the party, everyone's gone home. He's the one that stays there. And no one likes him anymore. And I think that's Gore right now. No one knows why the fuck he's there. He's being fed to a guy named Bakoev. And I just think that after this fight, if he's not in the UFC, good. But if he is, what the fuck? Yeah, that's my rant. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, well said. I'm not going to defend Trishan Gore after I bet on him against Vieira, and he just was like a walking body bag. Will, do you have anything to say about any of the fights other than the ones we're going to talk about later?
Honestly, absolutely not. I also bet on Trishan Gore, and I don't think I've gotten over that traumatic experience. No, this is probably the most forgettable fight card I've ever seen. I kind of immediately found one fight I was very interested in, and I've been tunnel vision about it all week, so I don't really look into fights where there's debutantes. There's a lot of them here. There's also a lot of like massive minus whatever favorites. So like just all of the card is very skippable from a betting perspective. So I haven't really plugged my brain in, and I don't really have a finger on the pulse this week. So yeah, no comment.
Well, with that, we can move on to the fights, and I have the pleasure, or the privilege, I should say, to talk about the main event. And before I go into this, I was trying to remember what I said about Sam Patterson versus MVP, because I had that fight to talk about a couple of weeks ago, and I probably said something like, this is going to be a banger. And then I was there in the arena, and it was definitely the worst fight I've ever witnessed live. And probably if you watched it televised, you probably thought the same thing, because there was 5 strikes thrown in the whole 3 rounds, I think. And MVP somehow won a unanimous decision. So the reason I bring that up is because obviously MVP and Sam Patterson have trained together. And here we have Renato Moicano and Chris Duncan, who are both fighting out of American top team. But I've been assured by listening to some coverage that they don't train together extensively, although Chris Duncan did say that on Mondays and Tuesdays he does see Moicano in the same sessions. So whatever that means, they definitely have trained together in the past. They definitely do know each other pretty well. And the first thing to say is that Chris Duncan has given a quite extensive interview with James, I think his name is Blissett, Lucrative MMA, and that's on YouTube. I think it's worth a listen if you're interested in betting on this fight, because Chris Duncan talks about betting on the fight, which seems like an odd conflict of interest. And I've never, broken down a fight when I've had a fighter actually give his own prediction. So Chris Duncan predicts a 4th round TKO for himself, of course. It'd be a bit weird if he was predicting Moicano to win. He did say, though, that he doesn't think he can submit Moicano. So hopefully that helps everyone with their bets. If you want to bet on Chris Duncan, go for a TKO, not a sub, because it seems like he's never subbed Moicano in training. Other interesting snippets from that interview include, they started talking about a weight loss drug called retatrutide or something. But they mainly focus on Chris Duncan's approach to the fight. And he basically said that he envisages this fight going long and that he'll finish Moicano in the latter rounds. And he indicates that he's got the better of him in training. And he also revealed that Moicano was offered multiple opponents and that Moicano selected Duncan. So that is interesting as well, because you can only assume that Moicano must fancy himself as well in this bout. So, yeah, both these fighters have quite a few fights under their belt already. Chris Duncan has 7 fights in the UFC and Renato Moicano has 19. So I've kind of summarized here the attributes of the two fighters. Moicano is a grappling first fighter. He's a lot of submissions on his record. He's obviously Brazilian, got a Brazilian jiu-jitsu background. Like I said, 19 fights in the UFC, 12 wins, 7 losses. So tons of experience. Had 2 main events. One of them went the distance. So he went 5 rounds with, oh my God, who was it? He went 5 rounds with, bear with me, my brain. He went 5 rounds with another Brazilian, but it was short notice. Rafa dos Anjos, that was it. Stepped in on short notice to fight Rafa dos Anjos. And he also had a main event, obviously, with 5-round main event with Islam Makhachev, which went just 1 round and he got subbed. What I like about Moicano is that I think, in addition to his grappling, he's got pretty decent stand-up. So he's got a good jab and he can manage range fairly well. He does get caught on the feet, so he is hittable. He's approaching 37 years of age, I think, in May. So that is a concern. And cardio question mark, because in his last couple of fights, in his last fight specifically, the one against Benny Dariush, he seemed to kind of slow down a bit in rounds 2 and 3. If anyone remembers watching that fight, Moicano versus Dariush was quite exciting because they had a close first round and Moicano dropped Dariush at the end of the first round, dropped him with a right straight. Dariush managed to sort of recover. Obviously, he had the break in between rounds to recover, and then basically he shot a takedown straight away on Moicano, and basically what ensued was 2 rounds of grappling. And so I don't know if Moicano's cardio is completely gone because he had to grapple for 2 rounds there, you can't really read into the Islam Makhachev fight at all because it was so short. So the fight before that, Renato Moicano fought Benoit Saint-Denis, and he absolutely schooled BSD. I mean, to rewatch that fight, and he took BSD down. So he got a body lock, trip takedown within a minute. He managed to advance position pretty quickly, got into full mount, body lock full mount, and was just teeing off on Benoit Saint-Denis with elbows, punches, and just completely destroyed him. And then there's this narrative going that I've heard other people say that, but BSD was coming back into the fight. He did win round 2. It's true. He did outstrike Moicano in round 2. Moicano was still landing on BSD, but he had 2 basically shut eyes that were bleeding. And yes, okay, so I take the point that BSD was coming back into the fight, but Renato Moicano could see the damage he'd done. He probably thought to himself, maybe he was a little bit gassed from all the exertion in round 1. He probably just thought to himself, you know what, I won't go hell for leather because this guy's not going to go 5 rounds. There's no way with that damage on his face he's going 5 rounds. And they stopped the fight and then a round 2. So there's this thing going on that apparently BSD was going to destroy Moicano if that fight had kept going. I find it like, I don't know, for me it feels delusional to think anyone thinks BSD was going to win that fight because he just suffered so much damage. It was a foregone conclusion. I'm going quite a long time now just to say that I don't know where his cardio is at because he did seem to drop off in the second round. That's a fair point. But I just feel like, he could have picked it up in round 3 and finished BSD or round 4. It was a Moicano, a sensational, probably his career best performance, or you could take the one before that against Jalen Turner. So yeah, I think the weakness of Moicano, the last one on the list here other than his cardio, is that, because he's good at jiu-jitsu, sometimes he accepts bottom position. And we flip onto the other side, Chris Duncan, all action Chris Duncan, had so many good fights in the UFC, but he's only had 7 fights, right? So he's lacking in experience. Amazingly, he's 7-1 in the UFC, plus a loss on the Dana White's Contender Series the first time round against Borshev. He's only lost to Manuel Torres, but his level of competition isn't like super high. Fighting, Terence McKinney, Rombetsky, a guy called Jordan Vucinic, who's not in the UFC anymore, and Balaji Oki. And I think he's built up a bit of reputation because he's finishing a lot of his fights and he has all action fights. He pressures quite well. He's powerful and he's gritty. Gritty meaning he can take a punch and throw one back. But I think like some of the things, the deficits on his side are, I don't know. I think he telegraphs some of his punches a bit. Some of them he wings a bit. I'm not sure that his punches or his speed are really like elite. He's definitely very hittable, as Moicano is, but I think Duncan's even more hittable. He brawls, and I guess that kind of links to the final point, which is questionable sort of fight IQ in certain senses. Like brawling, you don't need to brawl. Like he didn't need to brawl with Rombetsky in round 3, for instance. He like clearly was up, but he just continued to engage, which is why his reputation goes before him. So yeah, I think this is a super close fight. For me, it feels like 50-50. Okay, maybe you can give a slight edge to Chris Duncan because I should put here, youth is on Chris Duncan's side. He's 32 years old. So yeah, I mean, there's that on the Duncan side. He probably has got a slight cardio and fitness edge if the fight goes long, which I suspect it does, because I'm going to play the training angle, training partner angle here with the over 2.5 rounds. It could be risky because both men are capable of being knocked down. Both men have shown good recoverability. So that's kind of one play that I like, which is over 2.5. Maybe to be safe, you could go over 1.5. And then how the fight ends, I think it could be a Moicano. If it's going to end inside the distance, Moicano sub or Duncan by KO. And ultimately, because I feel this fight is close, I think the Moicano money line holds some value. It wouldn't surprise me if Moicano is able to dominate Chris Duncan in the grappling and potentially sub him or just control-based decision. I know that sounds pretty unlikely. Probably it's huge odds on Moicano decision, but I think that there's definitely levels to this. And I think Moicano probably knows he's better on the ground. And Chris Duncan actually said in the interview, sorry, going back to the interview, he actually said, like, I'm not afraid to go anywhere with Moicano. I might even take him down. I don't think it would be the smartest thing for Chris Duncan to take Moicano down, but stranger things have happened, and Chris Duncan has good top pressure, so I don't want to doubt him, but he's definitely not going to be scared to engage anywhere. That's according to him from the horse's mouth. So yeah, that's my take, and maybe Joshua, will you have a different take?
I don't really have any take at all. Like when you said that Duncan was being interviewed by Lucrative James, I didn't know that until you said that. So that kind of like rang a bit of an alarm bell in my head, only because like maybe there might be some and excuse me for my conspiratorial mindset here, but some market manipulation, right? Because I mean, Duncan said he predicts himself to get a round 4 KO. But the more that I think about that, the more that I think that maybe these two fighters, Moicano and Duncan, have probably agreed a gentleman's bet to make this fight go the distance. And that's a nightmare case scenario for everyone because it's a 5-round fight. We just saw Sam Patterson and the other dude, MVP, go through the most boring fight known to mankind. And now we're expected to see, well, I'm expected now to see a similar kind of thing this weekend. Like I don't know, but like when it comes to like outside of that whole thing that I just said there, I feel like Moicano is the side I to take. I think he has fought the tougher competition. He has the grappling advantage. I know that he accepts bottom a lot, as you wrote down there, but that's just a grappler's thing to do, right? Like, I mean, butt scoot and pull guard, all that shit. I think Moicano is much more tricky on the ground than Duncan, and I know that Duncan can overwhelm Moicano via striking, but as you said, he is hittable and he does brawl. Those 2 points there kind of make me err on the side of Moicano even more because like I don't think that Duncan's any bit special on the feet. Moicano, he just has it all, really. I don't know. I think you threw a wrench into my brain when you talked about the James Lucrative James interview, because that kind of like set me for a spiral. So that's all I'm focused on now, really, the whole round 4 KO conspiracy and whether or not that's market manipulation, whether or not it's like a gentleman's deal between Moicano and Duncan. That's got me in a bit of a tizzy.
Yeah, I mean, rightly so. And we'll go to Will. Maybe Will can give his thoughts on this. But my first thought when I heard the interview was this is like totally inappropriate. And I don't know how long this will go on for, but it showed a kind of like a lack of awareness potentially from Chris Duncan. And because we're still basically in the early days of MMA and the growth of the sport, but you can't imagine like a professional athlete in any other arena talking about betting. Because it's strictly forbidden, right? Like we're going through some things with the NBA, and these are like really, really big issues. So I did find it pretty strange, and it did kind of actually lower my opinion a little bit, actually, of the both of them, to be honest. And I think one thing I forgot in my breakdown actually before I go to Will is that I think Moicano is extremely smart. He's an extremely smart person. Even though you hear him speak and you don't think that, if you listen to some of the things he says, actually, like about anything like life, investments, what he does with his money, he's got a smart head on his shoulders, and he's had to self-educate himself. So he's done it all through reading books and educating himself on how to like grow as a person and grow his own businesses. And that's why I think it's really interesting that he selected Duncan. And Duncan seemed to like it. He seemed to think like, oh, that's great because I know I'm better than him on, in the training room. But I think that's subjective, right? So yeah, Will, what was your thought on the interview? Have you watched it or generally the matchup?
I've not watched the interview, but I've heard some of the cliff notes. Yeah, I definitely agree with you in that it is very jarring and questionable. The UFC's relationship with gambling is unlike any other major sport, really, in that whilst they've been pushing it, they kind of keep a distance to it whilst they push it. Whereas, no, sorry, that's what other sports do, but the UFC are all in on it. Dana White's promoting betting companies on his Instagram pretty much every week now. So yeah, I mean, it's not the first time that fighters have had that kind of a relationship with like betting related content creators. I know Dan Levy from Half the Battle has been friends with a few fighters like Cody Durden and Malcolm Wellmaker, I think. So, you know, it's not the first time we've had that crossover and they've appeared on like podcasts and stuff. But yeah, Duncan analyzing his own fight from a betting perspective was very weird. And like, I think really that just adds to the circus that this fight is in general. It is just a weird fight because you've got guys who are, in my opinion, like the polar opposites in so many natural aspects of fighting, but then they also are like connected by being at the same gym. So that sometimes it's too close to pull apart, and sometimes it's too far apart to even think about having it together. Because Moicano, in my opinion, is the far more skilled martial artist. And if they were wearing gloves that were like pillows, then I think Moicano would probably win quite handily. But Chris Duncan is a tornado. He's a very chaotic man. And when you have those like high variance guys who just like to throw caution to the wind, you get less predictable outcomes. You get higher variance, don't you? So I think Moicano can be a real victim of variance. I mean, we saw that in the Drew Dober fight where he demonstrated a takedown and grappling superiority that was enough to determine the fight. But anytime they got back to the feet, Moicano just looked like he was in danger. And, you know, we've seen him KO'd by Rafael Fiziev, which is, you know, not something we see Fiziev do very often. He's much more of a decision-based fighter. Got knocked out by Korean Zombie in a minute when he was supposed to be like the next big thing. Jose Aldo knocked him out. I think I would probably say that was when Aldo was sort of a little bit over the hill and was just sort of in cruise control. He got guillotined by Brian Ortega when Ortega was on that terrifying streak of just pulling wins out of his ass. Yeah, I just don't think that Moicano is a particularly trustworthy guy, and if there is going to be chaos, he will probably be the victim. Whereas I've been trying to fade Chris Duncan for the most part since he appeared on Contender Series. I mean, I think we all remember that fight against, was it Charlie Campbell on Contender Series, where he was like almost out on his feet and just managed to pull a KO out of nowhere in like a ridiculous fight that was like 2 minutes long. Really demonstrating the point that even if he is outgunned, he can still surprise you and just turn it up out of nowhere. So it's one guy I think is technically superior, but I can't trust, versus a guy who I think is technically inferior, but I very much rate the chaoticness of. But unfortunately, the chaotic guy is the favorite, and that kind of makes it less appealing, because you kind of want the inferior fighter to be the underdog to sort of spring the upset with a moment of madness. And then when you add in the fact that there's this narrative about them being training partners, and I mean, you mentioned the MVP Patterson fight. I was sat next to you when that happened, and I think we were about 7 seconds into the fight. They'd barely gotten to the center of the octagon to touch gloves before I think it was you went, these guys used to train together. And the two of us slowly realized as the seconds ticked by that fight goes the distance, and this one to be a snooze fest was such an obvious angle that just smacked us both in the face. And I spent the 15 minutes just ruin over the fact that I didn't fucking think about it. And it really annoyed me, because it would have been such a genius play. I can't even remember what the odds were, but I think now that is still fresh in my memory, and it's making me think here that this is exactly the same kind of thing, which it doesn't have to be, because Duncan is far too chaotic to ever put on a fight like Patterson MVP. Also, you know, the conversation for that one obviously becomes about overs and unders and totals, and does the fight go the distance? I believe the over under 2.5 is the pick'em for this one. And for me personally, as somebody who was ready to investigate those kind of lines when it came out, 2.5 just doesn't appeal to me, because if Duncan decides he wants to go and kill Moicano from the get-go, that's going to be the longest 12.5 minutes of your life, and it probably doesn't cash. So yeah, I think that one being a pick'em is actually lined kind of correctly at being the halfway mark. So I just basically, all of that is to say, I don't know anything about this fight from like a confirmed perspective. I'm excited to see it all play out, but I think there's like 101 different ways it could go. So yeah, I don't want to plant a flag anywhere. I guess like in situations like this, I always favor the experience and the superior martial artists, and hope that, I guess you could say, justice prevails, and therefore I would pick Moicano, but that's a load of nonsense, and I have no idea. So I'm going to sit firmly on the fence, as I often do on this podcast. So yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, the over 2.5 in the MVP Patterson fight was actually a pick 'em as well. So it was a pretty good bet if anyone took the over 2.5. But the reason I guess people didn't, if they were just sort of looking at records, is because Patterson had 4 first-round finishes, and that's why you got that nice line, and you needed the intel on the training partners. But yeah, I agree this is more volatile. I think that point about Chris Duncan is very true. You really don't know what you're going to get with him. But one thing that I didn't mention in my breakdown is I kind of went through most of his fights to see if he was the initiator of the madness. And in most fights, it isn't. Like, with Oki was coming after him and he was counter-striking. Rombetsky was definitely the aggressor in the first round of their fight. And of course, Terence McKinney needs no further introduction. He just went headfirst into Duncan. So yeah, I think I do agree though. I think he is, he's a brawler. So, but he kind of needs someone, to brawl with, if that makes sense. Yeah, definitely going to be an interesting main event. I'm not going to call it a banger because who knows what we're going to get. It could be a snooze fest, but hopefully it's a entertaining fight. Both these guys know they're in the main event, and yeah, we'll see what happens.
Alrighty. Co-main event. I said earlier on that there was only one fight I was focused on. Kudos to anyone who predicted it was this. It probably was pretty obvious if you've listened to a few episodes by now. It's the women's MMA fight at the top of the billing. It's Virna Jandiroba versus Tabitha Ricci. I'm not going to lie, this could be a pretty boring fight, but I'm hoping it all kind of depends on how Tabitha Ricci approaches it. So for those who are unaware, Virna Jandiroba, very one-dimensional, Damian Maia-esque grappler who has very basic striking that's not particularly impressive to anyone. But if she gets fights down to the mat, she is very dominant. And, we saw from her last fight, she managed multiple minutes of top control over Mackenzie Dern. And yes, she ended up getting nullified and elbowed relentlessly from the bottom. But there's not many women who would even have the ability to do 25 minutes of grappling on top of Mackenzie Dern. So it goes to show that Virna is obviously very high level. She was on like a 5 or 6 fight winning streak coming into that fight. She just fought for a belt. So she's quite clearly very talented at what she does, even if what she does is very one-dimensional. And I say that because I'm about to completely contradict that point. I absolutely hate it when a fighter has a really good run of form and then a fall from grace, and everyone turns around with hindsight being 2020 and says, they were overrated, they were never that good. And whilst I do hate it, I do have to say that honestly, Virna Jandiroba has benefited from an almost Paddy Pimblett-esque weak strength of schedule. She was given tailor-made matchups pretty much the entire time, and that's not her fault. It isn't like the UFC haven't done it on purpose. That strawweight just has this weird curse of strikers who cannot grapple or get up to save their life. I'm thinking of who am I thinking of? I'm thinking of Angela Hill. You've got Marina Rodriguez, Amanda Lemos, Yan Xiaonan, Jessica Andrade. These days, all of them are, I want to strike with you, but if you take me down, the round's pretty much over. To the point where some of them even deliberately lie on their back and shell up so that they could get to the striking in the next round. Anyway, Virna Jandiroba's record is basically only ever beating women like that and struggling against anybody who shows any sort of grappling resistance. Like I said, Mackenzie Dern. She also lost to Amanda Ribas, who she did have her in trouble in round 1 with a back take, but Amanda Ribas, very good grappler herself, was able to nullify the grappling in rounds 2 and 3 and just show that she's a superior striker. Carla Esparza, obviously, it's been quite a long time since we've even talked about her, but she's got a very good wrestling base herself. She was able to win a lot of those exchanges and scrambles and spend more time on top. So, yeah, I think it's quite clear to me to see that there is an element of not favoritism, but I just think that Virna Jandiroba is someone who's benefited from some favorable matchmaking. Tabitha Ricci, on the other hand, is a fighter who is very well-rounded, I would say. I think that she has shown herself to be very defensively sound when it comes to people wanting to impose physicality and impose grappling on her. She currently is second in the strawweight history rankings of least time in like the bottom position of control time. So I think she's been controlled for 1 minute and 1 second in her entire UFC career, which is the second least of any fighter who's had 5 or more appearances. A very niche statistic, but it's entirely relevant here. You would immediately think that that's because she's got amazing takedown defense, but it's actually not really that. It's because she has very good footwork, to the point where she's so evasive and she's so kinetic that you can't get your hands on her to even try and take her down. She darts in and out. She'll jump into range, throw a combination of 2 or 3, and then dart back out again. And she really confuses her opponents by just being so active that they can't make the reads. They can't sort of like set themselves to begin any sort of like game plan sequence attack. She just really does overwhelm people mentally as well as physically, if that makes sense. And when I look at Virna Jandiroba's grappling style and how she wants to get this one to the mat, I would say that she's somebody who likes to use her physicality to clinch up, force the fight to the cage, and then get the single and double legs going. She's not so much of a clinch, body lock, trip, takedown in open space kind of girl. You'll see a lot of work up against the cage. So I felt kind of cheap quoting that number of how much time she spent in the bottom position, Ricci, because that also includes cage control time, and a lot of the time that's where that number gets skewed. Sometimes you'll look into the stats on a fight and see that a fighter was controlled for like 6 minutes, but then the fight never really touches the mat. It's all just against the cage. But if you consider that number for Ricci, it even holds even more like credence, because she's just so evasive that it's hard to pin her against the cage as well. So you can kind of see where I'm going with this one. I looked into the ways in which Virna gets the fight to the ground, and then I flipped it and translated it to how Tabatha Ricci looks against that style of opponent. And I think it's a very generous matchup for Tabatha Ricci, in that she's got the exact style that she actually like really looks good against. And if there's only one fighter in the division that mostly resembles Virna Jandiroba's style, it's not Mackenzie Dern, it's Gillian Robertson, somebody who, if she gets stuck on the feet for 15 minutes, she's probably going to lose. I say probably. I don't think Gillian Robertson's won a striking fight against anyone. But obviously, if they get to the mat, then it's chaos. And in that fight, she took the approach that all of those aforementioned very bad grapplers but good strikers didn't take against Jandiroba, in that they were so focused on not getting taken down because they knew that would mean they'd lose the round and lose a third of the fight. So they abandoned their volume and their own stand-up game with the intention of just stopping the takedowns. And that doesn't work, because it doesn't win you a fight, because how are you supposed to win a fight if you're not doing anything offensively correct? But Tabatha Ricci didn't do that against Gillian Robertson. She, like I said earlier on, overwhelmed her with a very high amount of output for somebody who wanted to keep the fight standing. She didn't overexert herself, but she sat on the line perfectly, if that makes sense. And I very much hope she does the same against Jandiroba. So if Tabatha Ricci can keep that volume up and keep that movement up, I think Jandiroba's just going to get confused, and she's just going to hit a bunch of dead ends with her attempts to get the fight to the mat. And perhaps I'm overlooking the striking here. I haven't really talked about it at all. I just think that it's pretty obvious that Virna Jandiroba is inferior from a striking perspective to pretty much everybody, and that certainly includes Tabatha Ricci. I think I am making an assumption, but I think I've seen enough that it's quite clear to say that Ricci should win a striking fight. The only final thing to mention is the intangibles, just very quickly. It's not a major point. I think I've said enough, but Virna Jandiroba is nearly 38 years old now, I think. I know she's 37. I think she's been 37 for quite a long time. So she's probably nearly 38 now. She just lost a title fight. And considering she is a one-dimensional woman, and she's 38 years old nearly, you can't imagine that her career is looking upwards. She's probably just hit the peak and she's now on the downwards trajectory. I'm not saying that means a whole lot, but like the UFC know it as well, I think. It just seems like Virna was a one-shot title fight kind of woman, and she tried and she failed, and now it's on to something else. Tabatha Ricci, on the other hand, is coming in off her first KO win. She did beat Amanda Ribas, so that's the low-hanging fruit of KO wins, but she did, and she looked good doing it. Speaking of her looking good, she's quite popular amongst the UFC fan base. She's far more well-known than she should be, and if you don't know what I'm referring to, you'll probably realize by the end of the week. So yeah, there's marketability reasons here too, and I think the UFC have put this fight together knowing that Ricci can get it done, get her name against a former champion under her belt, and enter into the title picture in a division that really could do with some challenges. So yeah, that was incredibly long. I'm very sorry about that. I got Tabitha Ricci at +110. I think she's still around like pick and range. I think this one should be like -150 at very least. So I've got 3 units on it. I'm very excited for this one, and I hope I've read it right. Does anyone have anything to say on the contrary? Have I missed something, or yeah, Josh, do you got anything for us? What do you think?
Yeah, the one, I mean, you covered pretty much everything that I was going to really talk about as well. So well done there, really. But the one thing that really intrigues me is the apex. I mean, I know that I always bring up like how small the cage is and how that can affect wrestlers or aggressive wrestlers when they get their takedowns going. I have concerns that Ricci, despite her movement and her evasiveness, is going to be caught up against the cage because of the size of the cage, right? Because the apex is smaller. Verna could probably trap her a bit easier compared to a regular sized octagon. I used to like Jandiroba. I used to think that she was going to be a black sheep or dark horse or whatever you want to call them. Until she fought Dern and lost, even though that fight was really, really close. I think that Ricci is just going to be evasive, as Will said, and she is going to probably avoid all of the takedown attempts from Jandiroba. But again, my thought process goes back to the apex. The smaller cage often helps the aggressive wrestler to cut off the cage and get those takedown threats going, or at least the takedowns themselves going, right? So I am intrigued to see how effective Jandiroba's takedown attempts are against Ricci this weekend in the apex, because I can imagine in the full-size cage, Ricci's going to have much more of a bigger advantage with her footwork, with her evasiveness, and yeah. So really, my main interest is the apex, the size, and all that stuff. So yeah, that's all I have to say. So yeah, what about you, Dom?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's definitely a good point. I mean, the only counter to that is, not a counter really, just an additional point, is that she has at least fought in the apex at least a couple of times. I'm looking at her record because I think that familiarity, obviously if it's the first time she was fighting in a smaller cage against someone like this, that would be a more of a question mark. But yeah, I just think she's got to be smarter with the movement in a smaller cage. I do think that is something that is potential spanner, because I watched some tape for this one as well, because I'm confused by the line movement, because like Will said, when this was lined at Pick'em, I thought Ricci was the side, but the betting public, they disagree and they flip the line. Sorry, Ricci was like a slight favorite, like very slight. And now Ricci is the underdog and Werner is the favorite. So the line flipped, but it's still very, very close. It is within pick and range. So you could just call it noise, I guess. Not a true betting signal or anything. There's obviously some people out there who like Werner. I think the topology gives you an insight there. Like topology is like 90% Werner. And I think, so I was trying to like break this down. I think one of the key reasons that the line is like this, is to do with Yan Xiaonan, because if you're wiki capping this and you just look at their records and you watch the fights, I don't know if you actually watch the fights, probably don't when they're wiki capping it, but Ricci flew to China, so she was the away fighter, and she had to fight Yan Xiaonan in a spot in which she was probably expected to lose, to be honest, because she's gone out there to China, and yeah, it was tough. Like, she didn't get many takedowns, and Yan Xiaonan's the better striker and just outstruck her. Striking figures were not pretty, 78 to 15. But it was pure striking, although, Ricci did land a takedown. No control time, really. And then you look at Werner. Werner's fought the same fighter and, like, dominated her. And so she dominated Yan Xiaonan because she took her down in every round and just lay on top of her. But the key thing about that comparison is that for every minute that fight was standing, Yan Xiaonan was winning that fight, on the feet. And it was a lot closer than I, because I've heard people talk about the fight, and the narrative is that Werner dominated Yan Xiaonan. And to be honest, I thought Yan Xiaonan on damage criteria, and that being the criteria by which Dern won rounds off Jandiroba recently, Yan Xiaonan won the first round. In the fact, she was taken down, but she did more damage when the fight was standing at the start and the end of the round, and she did more damage on the mat. Werner won round 1 through control. So that's the other big point about this breakdown is it's going to be a decision fight likely. I don't really see a finish, and it's going to come down to, can Werner get the takedowns? Can she control Ricci? And if she does, even if she does that, will the judges score it? So I'm optimistic for the pick. I also think that Ricci conservatively should be -150. I'm totally aligned with Will. But yeah, those things make me nervous. I would say also that Werner has the reach advantage, and she does have a fairly decent jab, but she's nearly 37. She's nearly 38. So she's getting on in age. She's slowing down. I think Ricci's going to have the speed, hopefully the energy. She's got a judo background as well. She's got good hips. When she was taken down by Gillian in the 1 minute and 40 tape that we have of her being held down, she actually manages to get out from underneath Gillian using her hips, right? So yeah, it's going to be a bit of a tough watch for Ricci bettors, because I think Werner could get the takedown and could get the takedown in round 1, but I think over the course of 3 rounds, who does more damage, who has more output, it's got to be Ricci. So yes, we could get robbed on a decision. That's the one thing that's bugging me, and I don't know, Will, how you feel about the judges, and is that something of a concern here for you?
Not so much, really. I see what you mean, but I think that, again, we have to trust that they're doing their jobs and like following the letter of the law. And again, damage and like fight ending intent, it's going to be on Ricci's side, because for Werner Jandiroba to be doing enough to be winning rounds, unless it's like cage stalling, which again, not much damage going on there, she's either going to be like clearly winning the fight with top control, or she's going to clearly be the least damaging fighter. So I would hope this would be one of those fights where Ricci shows that she is the superior fighter. But yeah, it's a tough one. I think it could be close on the scorecards, but I just think it depends entirely on what kind of like sequence of events we get. Yeah, I should have touched on the Apex thing. I did mention it in my notes, but just didn't get around to saying it out loud. Yeah, it is the biggest concern, and I think that's why I said -150. If this was out in the big cage on like a traveling UFC card, I'd say -200 minimum for Ricci personally. Yes, also, Werner is a bit bigger. There is that size difference, but these things all predicate on the same thing of whether or not she can get her hands on her. And I think there's a difference in speed. I think when Werner moves, she doesn't move very well. She's very plodding. She's very much like a skyscraper of a fighter in terms of her posture, whereas Ricci is so like an Energizer bunny. So I'm really hoping that despite the having less size to work with, which definitely doesn't favour Ricci, I'm still thinking that she is going to be able to use her speed to stay safe. But it's a closely lined fight. Not everything needs to go your way in terms of the betting line. Like if it's a pick'em, you have to surrender. There are some things that are less than ideal. I'm not saying Tabitha Ricci should be -1,000 and will win every single second. I can see how Werner wins. I just don't think it's a 52% either side thing. I think it's more of a 60-40 at minimum. But yeah, let's crack on with the next one, shall we?
All right. Well, this is one that I kind of wanted to take last week when we arranged or asked each other what fight we wanted, and this one kind of stood out amongst all the shit. Like a corn kernel after you take a crap. It's always a one kernel. Anyway, that aside, I don't really have much to say here. This is going to be like a 2-minute breakdown, and then I'm going to pass it on to the hardworking folk in Dom and Will to make up for it. So, firstly, when it comes to Estevam, there, he has been a bit of a focal point for me this week, mostly because he has fought more times in the UFC than Ewing has. But it does come with a few concerns. He is mostly a grappler or a wrestler. He is known for that high output of getting those takedowns or being in the face of his opponents to get those takedowns, right? So he wants to basically sniff the crotch of Ewing throughout this whole fight, I reckon. And that sounds great on paper, but when you look at it deeper, I suppose it does make me a bit worried because Estevam has been outstruck 2 of 3 times in the UFC. So what that means is like 2 of his 3 fights in the UFC, he has been outstruck. And considering that Ewing is a bit of a striker, I do think that Estevam is going to be feeling the punches and not liking them at all, which incentivizes him to get those takedowns going, much like Muhammad Makayev does when he fights, right? He gets punched in the face and he goes for a takedown straight away. It's like a natural reflex for that guy. And the same thing's going to happen with Estevam here. Like, I reckon he's going to get punched in the face and, rinse and repeat, all that stuff, But on the flip side, I do want to talk about Ewing here because there has been a lot of talk about Ewing and, his whole win over Wellmaker. I don't look into that win that much at all. In fact, never. I completely discount that win, which sounds stupid because I've been in the fight game for about 10 years now. I shouldn't be talking like that, but hear me out here. Whenever it comes to a late notice fight for any fighter, it's a late notice fight for both fighters, right? Because it's like studying for I don't know, a physics test and then walking into the physics room or walking into the exam room and it's a beautician class, right? It's like, what the fuck did I study for? So I think that in that case between Ewing and Wellmaker, it was just a case of, not being prepared for the late notice change, and Ewing capitalized on that by being the completely different fighter that Wellmaker was not ready for. So with that said, given that Estevam has had a full camp to get ready for Ewing, I do think that Estevam should get that win here. I know that, what does Topology say? I know that maybe 62% of the people are picking Ewing. That's fine, that's respectable, but I think a fair portion of that percent is strictly looking at the Wellmaker win. That Wellmaker win looks good in the record, but when you look into it more, it simply is just a matter of being late notice and being unprepared for XYZ, whatever, right? The other thing I kind of want to point out here is the gyms, the teams, right? Estevam trains out of Nova União, which is a notorious Brazilian gym. They have prepared for pretty much every kind of fighter known in the history of mixed martial arts and all that stuff. I expect Estevam to be at least defensively ready for whatever Ewing has to throw. They do tape study very well. They do pretty much anything that has to do with preparing for a fight fairly well. On the other side, we've got Ethan Ewing coming out of CSW Training Center, who I don't even know who the hell comes out of that gym. I know a few fighters from that gym, but nothing too fantastic. It just seems like a typical American MMA gym, really. So I am also further banking on Estevam to win here. I'm not directly picking him in this podcast, but like I'm leaning in that direction, only because of that Nova União training camp and whatever stuff, right? I expect Ewing to land more strikes than Estevam, but I also expect Estevam to get those much needed takedowns. And as I said in the Ricci Jandiroba breakdown, the smaller apex ring or octagon does favor the grappler here, and I think that Estevam can be the one pressuring Ewing back and probably getting those takedowns, because if he doesn't, he's going to get knocked out. It's going to be that simple. So if we go to my bets here, or my bet recommendations here, I do have an over 2.5 rounds potential bet here. I haven't placed this bet yet. I might in the future, might today after this podcast, I might. But it's the only reel I have. As I said, I picked this fight because it's the only shining jewel in the muck. And yeah, that wasn't 2 minutes. I apologize. Will, Dom, you guys got anything to say?
Go ahead, Will.
I'm afraid I have very little. Estevam, yeah, crotch sniffer. Good at what he does, but what he does is aging like milk. He doesn't fight too often. I can't remember the last time he actually competed, but you would assume that you know, we talked a little bit earlier on about like judging criteria and damage and stuff like that. Estevam's not that guy. And if he's not fighting perfectly, and if this one gets competitive, I would worry that his style will seem like an uphill battle, in that he really has to stop Ewing from doing anything properly before before the judges start to think, oh, this damage is racking up a bit, and the other guy's not doing anything. So yeah, not really a huge fan of Estevam from like a betting perspective in any aspect, especially one that's lined relatively close like this. And on the other side, I mean, I've seen the Wellmaker win; it was impressive, but aside from that, I know nothing about Ewing, so I don't really have anything else to add, to be perfectly honest. It just seemed like a fight that I saw it and I was like, yeah, it's a tricky one. To sort of zoom out a bit, it's very tricky to know what to do when a fighter springs a massive upset like he did, because everyone's suddenly talking about him like he's the best thing since sliced bread, and he might be, but he also might have capitalized on somebody that we were overrating. You know, I say it all the time that there's a massive tax on fighters who do really well as an unexpected underdog in their debut, especially on a short notice, out of nowhere kind of thing. We blow up those people. Jordan Vicenic was a great example of that, when he was like a plus 250 dog to Kuta Taladze and fought really competitively. Everyone was like, oh my God, this guy's really good. If he can do that on short notice, what can he do on a full camp? And then Chris Duncan was like, lol, fuck you. So yeah, there are lots of examples like that. So I'm always very dubious and very skeptical of guys coming in for the sophomore appearance. So I'm kind of watching and waiting tentatively, but I'm not getting involved. So I didn't really research it that much. It's just something to be wary of, I suppose. Dom, how about you? Any more useful knowledge to impart on us?
Well, I think you guys have touched on most of the key points. I think, you know, one thing to mention about Estevam is obviously he's moving up in weight here, so it's his bantamweight debut, and you know, I don't want to make excuses for him because you shouldn't when someone misses weight, but he's missed weight in 2 of his 3 UFC appearances, so it probably is the case that bantamweight is his, you know, natural weight class now, and he was just, you know, trying to be a weight bully basically, because yeah, if you look at the on screen, you know, he's taller than Ewing, and the reach is the same. So these guys are going to be similarly sized. I've heard a lot of people saying, well, he won't be able to grapple Ewing because, you know, Ewing is going to be bigger. I mean, that's true, but Charles Johnson's a massive flyweight, right? He managed to grapple him. Yeah, and also speaking about wins, that is his best win, right? Charles Johnson. So, you know, Charles Johnson has a win over Josh Van. So, and in that fight, he did actually get into trouble in round 3. So the other thing to mention is that Estevam was, you know, gassing out in round 3 in his 2 UFC fights, early ones to Johnson and Aguilar, but against Felipe Bunez, who also looks miraculously cured of his cardio issues in his last fight against Shirez, he didn't have any serious like gassing out issues. Admittedly, you know, that was a bit of a lower pace fight, but I think going up to bantamweight is probably beneficial to Rafael Estevam here, and yeah, he shoots a lot. I don't know how many takedowns he's shot in his 3 fights, but I think it's like 50. Let me tell you how many it is. Well, I can only see actual takedowns secured. So he secured 16, 19. He secured 21 takedowns in his 4 fights. So yeah, he's going to be shooting a lot. And I think therein lies the issue, as Josh already mentioned, you know, and also will mention, we don't know if Ethan Ewing is a flash in the pan. I've watched a lot of his tape because I actually bet on Ethan Ewing against Wellmaker. I didn't get the opening odds, which were like plus 700 or something. I got something like plus 360 on Ethan Ewing, and I just threw like $50 or $100 on him. But, you know, still was a great return on investment. And I just could see that it was going to be competitive. I could see that striking is what he does best. And, you know, I think for every minute this is standing, it's going to feel a little bit like Ricci versus Werner, in the sense that Ewing will be winning the stand-up. But I just don't expect Estevam to keep it standing. And I think he's got better wrestling than Werner. And that's one thing we didn't talk about, actually. Werner does have actually pretty decent wrestling. But, you know, Ewing has got a wrestling background, so I should add that too. So it's possible that he's able to get out of some tight situations. But I think one thing we can be certain of is that Rafael Estevam is going to shoot again and again. And that's the difference with Werner. Like, she'll take breaks. Like, Estevam Yeah, he'll gas himself out, but he'll keep shooting. So I think the round 3 is going to be pretty touch and go if Estevam is successful in rounds 1 and 2. But, you know, I just think we just don't know, right? There could be levels here. And that's actually something we didn't talk about the previous one. We don't know what the levels on the mat are. Maybe Estevam is far superior to Ewing, you know, just like I think Moicano is to Duncan. And we've seen that play out time and again, and you know, and surprise us in many ways, you know, recently with Oliveira and Max, or, you know, DDP and Chimaev. So I think in these situations, I always want to err on the side of caution and just trust that the grappler, you know, if they have shown it in the past, that they'll do it again. And Ewing, I just don't know if he is that guy, like you say. If he is him, then he will keep this fight standing and he will piece up Estevam. But otherwise, I find these odds pretty strange. Like Estevam, yeah, as you mentioned, coming in another year now, Jim, and being 14-0 undefeated, you know, with not bad tape, moving up to his natural, probably what will be his natural weight class, sitting at, he went up to plus 135 earlier in the week. He's now back down to plus 110. So he's an underdog. Yeah, people are putting a lot of stock in Ethan Ewing, and a lot of people are going to have egg on their faces. A lot of cappers who have big followings are taking Ewing this week. And I do get it. I'm not saying they're like being silly or anything taking him. His tape's very good. He's very, very good on the feet. He's got a nice 1-2. He's got a lot of power. He's got a lot of knockouts, but that's if it's on the feet, right? So I think, you know, I think it's one of those ones where either side may look silly, but yeah, I'm actually on the Estevam side. I've bet on him, and you can see our bets here. As we've been doing recently, I've been breaking these down, but I don't know if you guys want to comment, or there's not much for Josh to comment on, but Will, if you want to comment on anything on your slate, because you've got Diony Barbosa there, is that something you're sticking with?
Yeah, so I did bet it when it was like minus 140, and then seeing that the line was trending the other way, I quickly cashed out. I think I still will bet it, but if I'm honest, it wasn't the strongest take I'd ever had, as you can see by the smaller unit size. So I do get spooked when this kind of thing happens. I do not think that the MMA betting public are particularly sharp when it comes to women's MMA. I've never thought it, to be honest, and so I shouldn't be scared. But I just think that Diony Barbosa seems like the slightly better striker of the two of them, and seems very competent from a wrestling and a grappling perspective specifically. She's very good with hitting sweeps and stuff like that. Whereas I don't think I trust Gatto. I think she's a bit submission over position, and I just overall think that when the sequence of events play out in the fight, you'll just see Barbosa come away on top more often than not. So I think she should be a little bit more of a favorite than like the pick'em that we currently have, or something very close to that. So yeah, I think she's a decent play, but not as committal as Ricci, hence why I didn't pick it. But yeah, aside from that, absolutely nothing else on the card. I am committing to women's MMA this year, it seems. How about you, Dom? What else you got?
Yeah, I already mentioned that I have the Ricci, like you, 3 units. Actually, it's a bit more than that. I think I need to sort of downscale just because it could be volatile on the judges' scorecards. So I probably need to get it down to 3 units. Yeah, I have slightly more than that because I thought the line would move in my favor and I would have the option to reduce naturally. But I think I'm going to just have to cut my losses. I'll keep waiting. There might be money that comes in on Ricci, but as you say, it's hard to know what the betting public will do when it comes to women's MMA. Estevam, literally just talked about him. I think, you know, he may lose, right? Ewing may be him, but I think at plus money, you can't go too wrong with the sort of non-stop grappler wrestler who's now going to be upper weight class, potentially with, you know, more energy and less chance of gassing. I think it's going to be a close fight. So yeah, I'm happy with plus 133, and if you can get something like that, I think that's probably the value side. And Moicano, I think I will increase my bet on Moicano. I think he's probably worth more than half a unit at these odds, because I think it's a close fight. I wouldn't say it's 50-50 necessarily, maybe a slight lean towards Duncan in terms of percentage, but I think at like plus 170, if you can get that, it's pretty good value. And then I already talked about the main event going over the halfway mark. Don't feel particularly comfortable about that one, but hopefully, hopefully the experience with MVP and Patterson, you know, repeats itself just for half the fight, because I don't want to jinx everyone to have a 5-round snooze fest. I'm predicting a late finish for one of them. Well, Moicano preferably. Yeah, Josh, you don't have anything anything you want to say about which way you're leaning for parlays or alt bets, or nothing at the moment?
I wish I did, but like the way that my brain functions is firstly not very well at all, and secondly, I kind of go from prelims upwards. Like if you look at topology, it's from bottom to the top. I normally make a single bet for each fight and then build a parlay from that. This entire week, I could not make any single bets. I could envision how fights could go, but like otherwise, no. This entire card has shut me down completely. So it's going to be TBD until it's decided. So yeah, nothing to say.
Well, that brings us to the end, and next week is a great card. So this, we were talking about before we came on, this feels like the prelims to next week, which is UFC 327, right? And that's going to be top to bottom. There isn't a single fight you'd really want to miss on that card. It is definitely the best card for a long time, and sorely needed in this string of, quite frankly, disappointing cards. So yeah, we'll see you on the next one. Thank you for listening.